Immanuel Kant. How is objective knowledge possible through the structures of the mind? Immanuel Kant was born in 1724 in Niggsburg, Prussia, where he spent his entire life as a dedicated academic. Growing up in a pietist household, he was deeply influenced by a sense of moral duty and disciplined study. Kant's early career focused on the rationalism of Leibniz and Wolff, but he was famously awakened from his dogmatic slumber by David Hume's skepticism. This intellectual crisis led him to write his monumental Critique of Pure Reason in 1781, marking the beginning of the critical period. Living during the height of the Enlightenment, Kant sought to reconcile the competing claims of empiricism and rationalism. His later works, including the Critique of Practical Reason and the Critique of Judgment, established a comprehensive philosophical system that redefined the boundaries of human knowledge, ethics, and aesthetics, making him one of the most influential figures in modern Western thought. Transcendental idealism. Transcendental idealism represents a revolutionary shift in how we understand the relationship between the mind and reality. Before Kant, philosophers debated whether knowledge comes solely from experience or from innate reason. Kant realized that while all knowledge begins with experience, it does not all arise out of experience. He proposed that the human mind is not a passive recipient of external data but an active participant that structures everything we perceive. To make sense of the world, our mind applies a priori forms of intuition, space and time, and categories of understanding, such as causality. The problem Kant addressed was the limit of human reason. He argued that we can only know phenomena, or things as they appear to us, through these mental filters. We can never have direct access to noumena, or the thing in itself, which exists independently of our perception. This distinction shifted the focus of philosophy from investigating the nature of objects to investigating the structure of the knowing subject, ensuring that objective knowledge is possible precisely because our minds provide the framework for it. Categorical imperative. The categorical imperative is the central principle of Kant's moral philosophy, designed to provide a purely rational foundation for ethics. Kant was motivated by the need to find a moral law that was universal and necessary, independent of individual desires or cultural circumstances. Unlike hypothetical imperatives, which tell us what to do to achieve a specific goal, the categorical imperative commands us to act out of duty alone. The primary formulation of this principle requires that we act only according to maxims that we could at the same time will to become universal laws. This means that before taking an action, one must ask if the world would still function if everyone else did the same. By grounding morality in reason rather than emotion or divine command, Kant attempted to establish the autonomy of the human will. He argued that every rational being must be treated as an end in themselves, never merely as a means to an end. This shift emphasized the inherent dignity of the individual and the importance of consistency and integrity in moral decision-making. Synthetic a priori knowledge. Synthetic a priori knowledge is a technical yet vital concept that Kant used to explain how certain types of scientific and mathematical truths are possible. Traditionally, philosophers divided judgments into two categories: analytic judgments, which are true by definition, and synthetic judgments, which add new information based on experience. The challenge Kant faced was explaining how we can have knowledge that is both synthetic, providing real information about the world, and a priori known independently of specific experiences. He argued that mathematics and the fundamental laws of physics belong to this special category. These truths are not merely derived from observing the world, yet they are not simple definitions either. They are possible because they reflect the very structure of human cognition. By identifying synthetic a priori knowledge, Kant sought to provide a transcendental foundation for the universal laws of Newtonian science, defending the possibility of objective knowledge against the threat of skepticism. Immanuel Kant's influence on later thought is so profound that almost all subsequent Western philosophy is, in some sense, a response to his work. His Copernican revolution in philosophy paved the way for German idealism, directly inspiring thinkers like Fichte, Schelling, and Hegel to explore the creative power of the subject. In the realm of ethics, his focus on duty and universal rights provided the intellectual framework for modern deontology and significantly influenced the development of international law and human rights doctrines, including the concept of a League of Nations for perpetual peace. Furthermore, Kant's work on aesthetics and the Third Critique laid the groundwork for Romanticism, emphasizing the role of the imagination and the sublime. Even in the 20th century, his ideas remained central to political philosophy through figures like John Rawls and to linguistics and cognitive science through the study of innate mental structures. Kant's legacy is a testament to the power of critical reason in defining the human condition. Johann Gottlieb Fichte. How can all reality be derived from the creative activity of the self? Johann Gottlieb Fichte, born in 1762 in Saxony, rose from humble beginnings to become one of the foundational figures of German idealism. After struggling with poverty during his youth, his life changed when he encountered the works of Immanuel Kant, which he felt provided a liberating sense of moral autonomy. Fichte gained immediate fame by publishing an attempt at a critique of all revelation, a work so Kantian in style that it was initially mistaken for Kant's own writing. As a professor at the University of Jena, he sought to complete what he saw as Kant's unfinished project, moving beyond the dualism of the thing in itself. His major work, the Wissenschaftslehre, or Science of Knowledge, aimed to derive all of reality from the activity of the self. Fichte lived through the turbulent years of the Napoleonic Wars, an era that shaped his later focus on national identity and the practical realization of freedom through collective moral striving. The absolute I. The concept of the absolute I, or the ego, is the starting point of Fichte's entire philosophical system. Fichte was dissatisfied with Kant's claim that there is a thing in itself that exists independently of our minds, viewing this as a lingering remnant of dogmatism that undermined human freedom. To resolve this, he proposed that all reality must be grounded in the self-positing activity of the I. For Fichte, the absolute I is not a static object or an individual psychological ego, but a pure activity of self-positing. This foundational act of consciousness simultaneously gives rise to both the subject and the not-objective world that serves as the necessary limit for the exercise of freedom. The problem Fichte addressed was how to achieve a truly unified philosophy that doesn't rely on external mysteries. By making the active subject the source of all experience, he attempted to shift philosophy toward a radical idealism where the world is understood as the product of the spirit's own internal necessity. Striving, Streben. Striving, or Streben, is the dynamic force that drives Fichte's account of human existence and morality. Fichte recognized a fundamental tension: if the I is the source of everything, why does it encounter resistance from an external world? He explained that the I encounters an Anstoß, or a check, which limits its activity. This limitation is not a failure but a necessary condition for freedom. Without resistance, the I could never become aware of its own power or exercise its will. The intellectual problem here was the reconciliation of theoretical knowledge with practical moral life. Fichte argued that the self is defined by its constant effort to overcome these limitations and bring the external world into harmony with the demands of reason. This striving is never-ending, as the complete absorption of the not-I would mean the end of conscious activity. This shift in thinking characterized the human condition as one of perpetual moral development, where our primary identity is found in our tireless effort to transform reality according to our ideals. Intersubjectivity and recognition. While Fichte is often associated with a focus on the individual I, his philosophy also provides a pioneering account of intersubjectivity. He faced the problem of how a free individual can exist in a world with other free beings without compromising their own autonomy. Fichte argued that an individual cannot even become conscious of their own freedom unless they are summoned or addressed by another free being. This summons requires the individual to limit their own freedom to allow space for the freedom of the other. The intellectual shift here was the realization that self-consciousness is not a solitary achievement but a social one. We only know ourselves as free agents through a relationship of mutual recognition with others. This concept moved philosophy away from the isolated subject of Descartes and toward a social ontology, where the I is always already part of a we. This framework laid the groundwork for modern theories of rights, suggesting that our existence as moral beings is fundamentally tied to our participation in a community of mutual respect. Johann Gottlieb Fichte's influence on later thought is marked by his radicalization of the subject and his emphasis on the practical realization of freedom. His work served as the essential bridge between Kant's critical philosophy and Hegel's comprehensive system, particularly through his development of a dialectical method involving the interaction of the I and not I. Beyond academic philosophy, Fichte's addresses to the German nation significantly influenced the rise of German nationalism and the concept of a collective cultural identity. His focus on the striving of the self and the primacy of action resonated deeply with the Romantic movement and later provided a foundation for existentialism, where the individual's will and choice are paramount. Furthermore, his theories on mutual recognition were deeply influential on Hegel's famous master-slave dialectic and continued to inform contemporary social and political philosophy regarding the nature of the self in society. Fichte's legacy persists in any tradition that views human life as a continuous project of self-creation and moral struggle. Friedrich Wilhelm Joseph Schelling. How do mind and nature emerge from a single primordial identity? Friedrich Wilhelm Joseph Schelling, born in 1775 in Württemberg, was a child prodigy whose intellectual career moved at a dizzying pace. At the age of 15, he entered the prestigious Spingenstift, where he shared a room with the future giants Hegel and Hölderlin. Schelling's early work was a brilliant extension of Fichte's idealism, but he soon sought to bridge the gap between mind and matter through his revolutionary philosophy of nature. Living through the peak of the Romantic era, Schelling moved in the same circles as Goethe and the Schlegel brothers, reflecting the period's obsession with the organic unity of all things. His career was marked by several dramatic shifts in thought, from the system of transcendental idealism to his later positive philosophy, which influenced religious thought and proto-existentialism. Despite being overshadowed by Hegel later in life, Schelling remained a vital force who sought to uncover the hidden, creative depths of the absolute. Philosophy of nature, Nature philosophy. Schelling's nature philosophy was a bold attempt to rescue nature from the mechanistic view of the Enlightenment, which saw the world as a giant clockwork machine. For Schelling, the problem with the idealism of Kant and Fichte was that it treated nature merely as a backdrop or a limitation for human action. He argued instead that nature is not dead matter but visible spirit, while spirit is invisible nature. In this view, nature is an organic, self-organizing whole that is moving toward consciousness. The intellectual shift here was the assertion of the essential identity of mind and matter. Schelling proposed that nature and spirit are not two separate substances, but two modes of a single, living productivity. He believed that by studying the physical world, magnetism, electricity, and biology are actually tracing the early stages of the spirit's own development. This idea integrated the scientific discoveries of his time into a grand metaphysical narrative, suggesting that the universe is a living, creative process. The absolute identity. The absolute identity is the cornerstone of Schelling's mature philosophy, where he sought to find a single, ultimate ground for all existence. The problem he addressed was the fragmentation of knowledge. How can we reconcile the world of things with the world of thoughts? Schelling proposed that at the highest level of reality, there is a point of indifference where subject and object, the ideal and the real, are one and the same. This absolute is not a person or a thing, but the primordial unity from which all differences emerge. The shift in thinking here was away from the primacy of the human I and toward a more objective, cosmic perspective. Schelling argued that our own conscious awareness is simply the point where the absolute becomes aware of itself. This moved philosophy toward a form of monism, suggesting that all the diversity we see in the world is just a variation of a single underlying substance. By grounding everything in this absolute identity, Schelling attempted to provide a complete and unified explanation for why there is something rather than nothing. Aesthetic intuition. Aesthetic intuition is what Schelling identified as the highest form of human knowledge, capable of reaching truths that ordinary logic cannot touch. He was motivated by the question of how we can ever truly grasp the unity of the absolute, which by definition transcends the divisions of our daily thinking. Schelling argued that in the creation and appreciation of art, the conscious and the unconscious, the free and the necessary, are perfectly merged. The artist acts with conscious intent but is also driven by an unconscious, divine inspiration. Therefore, the work of art is a finite reflection of the infinite absolute. The intellectual shift produced by this idea was the elevation of art to the status of the organon, or the essential tool, of philosophy. Philosophy provides the concepts, but art provides the living intuition of the whole. This concept made art the bridge between the human spirit and the mysteries of the universe, validating the idea that the artist possesses a unique, visionary insight into reality. Friedrich Wilhelm Joseph Schelling's influence on later thought is vast, often surfacing in unexpected places across philosophy, science, and psychology. His nature philosophy anticipated modern systems theory and organicism, influencing 19th-century biologists and even the development of depth psychology through his focus on the unconscious creative forces of nature. Within philosophy, his shift toward positive philosophy in his later years provided a direct inspiration for Kierkegaard in the rise of existentialism, as he began to emphasize the importance of individual existence and the limits of pure reason. Furthermore, his influence on Romanticism was definitive, providing the metaphysical justification for the movement's celebration of nature and artistic genius. In the 20th century, his ideas were rediscovered by thinkers like Martin Heidegger and later by environmental philosophers who found in his work an early critique of the technological exploitation of nature. Schelling remains a crucial figure for understanding the deep roots of both the natural world and the human spirit. Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. How does the unfolding of history lead to the self-realization of the absolute spirit? Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, born in 1770 in Stuttgart, is often considered the culmination of German idealism. After his studies at the Tübingen-Stift, he spent years as a private tutor and editor before achieving fame with the publication of the Phenomenology of Spirit in 1807, legendarily finished just as Napoleon's troops entered Jena. Hegel's goal was nothing less than a comprehensive system that could encompass all of history, logic, nature, and religion. As a professor in Berlin, he became the dominant intellectual figure of his age, his lectures drawing students from all over Europe. Living in the wake of the French Revolution, Hegel was obsessed with the idea of historical progress and the unfolding of human freedom. His massive works, including The Science of Logic and The Philosophy of Right, attempted to show that reality is inherently rational and that history is the process of the absolute spirit coming to self-knowledge. The dialectic, Aufhebung. The dialectic is the famous method through which Hegel explains the movement of thought and history. He was motivated by the problem of contradiction. Why does human knowledge and society always seem to involve conflict? Hegel argued that contradiction is not a mistake but the very engine of progress. Hegel described this movement as a process where an initial, abstract concept encounters its own internal contradiction or negation. Through this struggle, a new, higher level of understanding emerges. The crucial term here is Aufhebung, often translated as sublation, which means to simultaneously cancel, preserve, and lift up. Through this conflict, the opposing sides are resolved into a more comprehensive, concrete truth that preserves the essential elements of both. This shift in thinking moved away from seeing the world as a collection of static things and towards seeing it as a dynamic, historical process. For Hegel, the truth is not a simple fact but the result of this long journey through opposition. Absolute Spirit, Geist. Absolute Spirit, or Geist, is the central protagonist of Hegel's philosophy. The problem Hegel faced was how to provide a unified meaning to the chaos of human experience and the natural world. He proposed that reality is the expression of an underlying spirit or reason that is working its way toward total self-awareness and freedom. This spirit is not something outside the world but is immanent within it, manifesting through human culture, art, religion, and philosophy. The intellectual shift here was the idea that history is not just a sequence of random events, but a rational slaughter bench where the spirit gradually realizes its own nature. As we develop more sophisticated laws, sciences, and self-understandings, the spirit is effectively waking up. By the end of this process, the spirit recognizes itself and everything it has created, achieving a state of absolute knowledge. This moved philosophy toward a grand narrative of progress, suggesting that the ultimate goal of the universe is the achievement of perfect self-consciousness and the full realization of human freedom. The master-slave dialectic. The master-slave dialectic is one of Hegel's most famous and influential concepts, found within the phenomenology of spirit. He addressed the fundamental problem of how human self-consciousness is formed. Hegel argued that we cannot become truly self-aware in isolation, we need to be recognized by another conscious being. This leads to a struggle for recognition where two individuals confront each other. In this struggle, one becomes the master and the other the slave. However, a profound shift occurs, the master becomes dependent on the slave's labor and recognition, becoming stagnant. Meanwhile, the slave, through the discipline of work and the transformation of the material world, actually achieves a higher form of self-consciousness and freedom. The intellectual shift produced by this idea was the realization that our identity is social and that freedom is often born out of struggle and labor. This concept moved philosophy toward an analysis of power, dependence, and the liberating potential of human activity. Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel's influence on later thought is almost unparalleled in its scope and controversy. His dialectical method and focus on historical materialism were directly adopted and transformed by Karl Marx, laying the foundation for modern socialism and communism. Conversely, his right Hegelian followers influenced conservative political thought and the development of the modern state. In the 20th century, the master-slave dialectic became a cornerstone for existentialism, decolonization movements, and feminist theory, providing a framework for understanding how marginalized groups achieve autonomy. His focus on the historical nature of truth also paved the way for continental traditions like hermeneutics, post-structuralism, and critical theory. Even analytic philosophy, which often defined itself in opposition to Hegel, has recently seen a Hegelian turn in the study of social norms and the communal nature of reason. Hegel's legacy is a constant reminder that our thoughts, institutions, and identities are never static, but are always part of an unfolding historical process.